Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Beyond the Cage podcast. I am your host, Jim Graham. Alongside me is my co-host, Billy Brandt. On this week's show, we're going to talk about UFC 192 and pick the main card fights for that card this weekend in Texas. We're also going to go over Bellator 143 rather, and a host of top headlines in the world of mixed martial arts, including Jon Jones finally got sentenced for his hit-and-run felony this summer in New Mexico. Once again, as I mentioned, I'm your host, Jim Graham. Follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. He is Big Shot Bill, aka Billy Brandt. You can follow him on Twitter at WBrandt21. And let's get into headlines here to start off here, Billy. Let's talk about Jon Jones. As I mentioned, finally, after months of speculation and turmoil for the former UFC light heavyweight champion, a sentencing has finally come down. He will not serve jail time, but he will serve 18 months probation, as he pled guilty to the felony hit-and-run charges earlier this year by hitting a woman in Albuquerque, New Mexico, causing her to break her arm. The woman was also pregnant, and because he ran from the scene of a crime, ends up becoming a felony rather than just a simple traffic accident. There was also some drug paraphernalia found on his rental car, which was easily traced back to him because you got to use a credit card to rent a car. So with the sentencing down, 18 months probation, as I mentioned, I think it said something around 72 charity appearances. I don't know what where those all have to be, if that's like an official UFC thing or whatever. But looking at an article here on sheerdog.com by Tristan Crutchfield, most of the charity work is going to be with children, and he will not get a felony conviction as long as he meets these conditions of the probation. And once that 18-month period is complete, Jones will have another hearing, and he could be resentenced and could be given an early release from this program. The UFC had a statement here. The UFC organization is aware that Jon Jones breached a plea agreement with authorities in New Mexico this morning, stemming from charges associated with a motor vehicle accident early this year. As a result, the UFC, through Las Vegas-based law firm Campbell Williams, will thoroughly review the agreement before discussing Jon Jones' possible reinstatement and return to competition. More information will be made following the completion of his review. So he will be back eventually. They're going to review things. The only thing I could see holding up a return in 2016 is if they want Jon Jones to face this full probation or until he's off of probation. That's the only thing I could think of, Billy. But as long as they review it's okay, it doesn't violate any terms of probation, which I don't see how it would, he's probably going to be back in 2016. And the only thing I can maybe say is they may have it try to be like a year suspension, like unofficially, because this happened this summer right before, obviously, the UFC 187 fight. So they could have him possibly fight at the UFC 200 card. And to me, that's almost, regardless whether it's for a title or not, that may be the perfect opportunity to bring him back, because everything won't be on him. The pressure won't be on him as much, because they're probably going to have some other big-time fights. And a little of the focus kind of is put off of him by putting on such a big event.
Yeah, I honestly feel like there's no way, if he can legally fight, I don't know specifics how it's all going to work out, but if he can, the UFC is putting him on as soon as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if he fights the winner of this weekend's card immediately. They're definitely going to give him a title shot. I don't think they're not going to waste any time. He's going to come back, fight the winner of this weekend, I'm imagining, if it can happen. And they'll probably put out some statement like, yeah, he's paying for what he did. He's going through all the community service, so the UFC doesn't have to take any extra action on him. You know how they treat Jon Jones. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him really soon.
Now, what is not mentioned, obviously, typically when you reach a plea agreement, I wonder if there was some type of settlement towards the family that the mother, and obviously, I never heard anything about the child being threatened, the woman being pregnant, so that's good news. I think that the situation could have turned dark very quickly had something in her pregnancy went wrong, but I got to imagine that probably was some part of this plea agreement. I don't think they have to disclose that information, but I gotta imagine that happened. I highly doubt there was no type of settlement.
I'm sure rather it was from Jon Jones' side or the UFC that lady's been taken care of to like not do anything extra to go after him. I mean, I'm sure she's been taken care of the whole thing.
All right, from this, it stems two different things because, of course, as we know, John Jones is from the state of New York, upstate New York, that is. And according to Sheerdog here, the UFC has announced a UFC event in Madison Square Garden for April 2016, despite the state not having MMA legalized. The promotion announced Monday that they are looking to do an event on April 23rd, 2016. The announcement is a clear shot across the bow to New York state legislators as the UFC fights to lift the state's long-standing ban on MMA. No further details were announced regarding the event, and the UFC may have to cancel the event, and they even acknowledge that. There's a quote here in this article on Sheerdog. Later this week, UFC will ask a federal judge to issue a preliminary injunction against New York state officials enforcing its unconstitutional law, the company stated in the release. Without such an injunction, the event at Madison Square Garden will not be able to proceed. The announcement comes the same month as the 20th anniversary of the UFC's first and only event in New York, which took place in Buffalo in 1995. So this is maybe the UFC's chance to try to make change through basically kind of almost bluffing by saying, hey, we're booking this venue, we're going to do an event, and we're going to get this changed, instead of just kind of sitting back in the sidelines. And I think as much as they've sat back and tried to get things changed there, I think this is maybe the best move that they could do to try to get MMA legalized, but just saying, look, we're going to try to do an event here, stop us. And that may be the best way to get change sometimes, is to do things against the rules, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. I like that they're actually forcing it. They're saying, look, you guys think you can, the whole thing's ridiculous how it is still illegal there, but, and they're just going to say we're going to do it. But what I am worried about is that I feel like if they don't get, I just feel like it can all get canceled so quick. I feel like they're trying, but the way it all works out in the law, and it's something like Madison Square Garden to get all that booked, I don't want to get my hopes up is what I'm saying, because I'm not sure if I really think it'll happen, or at least this soon. I think it's a good step forward to really push the issue and make them think about it, but I think we might see this one not happen, but maybe a later one eventually.
Right. I think it's a step in the right direction, and obviously them doing it this far in advance, I mean, we're almost 8 months until that date, it's obviously going to be pretty easy to change. Obviously, we know they have a good history of fighting in New Jersey. They could easily switch it across the state border, still almost. And as we know, we went to the event in New Jersey, the last one they had, and they do a lot of heavy promotion in New York City anyway. So to me, it's not going to really change their promotion of the event if they have it in New Jersey.
Yeah, 100%. They're kind of almost lucky to have that backup plan, which I'm assuming is where it will go. But then again, I'm not sure, because if they're planning on doing that, I'm assuming they're going to make it one of the biggest events of the year. That's counting UFC 200 will be later, but it's definitely going to be a huge event. So I hope if it does make a difference, and it does either way, I think this is a step in the right direction. This is UFC saying, like, all right, the ball's in your court. This is what we're doing. You got to find a way to deal with this.
Now, speaking of Campbell and Williams, the law firm I brought up in the John Jones article that will review his agreement with the state of New Mexico in order to reinstate him to the UFC, I just saw on Nick Diaz's Twitter, at Nick Diaz 209, if you are following him for whatever reason, he just tweeted out just a few hours ago, the UFC put me in touch with their lawyers at Campbell and Williams, and they will also be helping me with the NSAC. So this is the first kind of recognition of UFC officials trying to help out Nick Diaz with this suspension from the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And I'm glad it's happening. I wonder why it took so long to happen is my main thing. But I am glad that it's happening, because regardless of what UFC and Dana White thinks about Nick Diaz, he's still one of their fighters. He's still one of their biggest draws on their roster. And as much as they've had so many former NSAC employees come over and now working with the UFC, even they have to realize that, again, this was marijuana. And two, this was way over any current regulations the state has even against marijuana. And that something has to be done, because Nick Diaz may be the first, but once you kind of break that precedent of going against your own guidelines, it could happen again to somebody else who maybe kind of does play by the rules somehow. And that's, to me, is the biggest thing, is making sure that, yeah, is he probably going to face suspension time? Sure. But let's make sure it's the correct suspension time. Let's make not sure he's suffering any more time away from the sport than he has to.
Yeah, I think this is a good call by the UFC. I mean, finally, they need to step up and help, and I think they even kind of pushed Nick to the side because he doesn't play by the rules. He's Nick Diaz, but I think they realize also this has helped Nick Diaz as a draw. I mean, he's already one of the bigger draws. Can you imagine now if he fights now? He's like a household name. They got Mayweather posting videos talking about the suspension. I mean, everyone has reacted to this, so when he comes, it's going to be huge. But I think the UFC helping Nick is more, I don't want to say rather than helping Nick, but more them going after the NSAC. Like, I think they want to set that point, like, someone needs to overlook these guys, and they've had a lot of problems with them in the past, so they really want to do some changes for that.
Wanted to bring this up real quickly. World Series of Fighting 24, October 17th. Most people may not too excited, but it does have John Fitch against, I don't know how he's going to do this, Billy, but Yushin Okami is going to try to make 170 pounds. That should be interesting. But the reason I bring it up is because the World Series of Fighting has decided to go ahead and add a flyweight division, and they will have a flyweight crown decided at World Series of Fighting 24 as Magomed Bulatalov against Donovan Freelo will be the first champion at 125. And I just want to bring that up because some people aren't fans of the 125 division, but I always thought it was a pretty exciting division, and I think it's a division that still has a lot of fighters still coming up. And I think that I don't know if I would have went ahead and went with a title fight. I don't know how many flyweight fights they've had. I would have liked to feature a couple ones, kind of get people built up to the guys they had before having a title. But
do like the UFC did with that tournament when they brought theirs in.
Yeah, I mean, they just did it with their light heavyweight division, crowning David Branch.
Mm-hmm.
But in this division, they're just like, nah, we'll throw it in. But that maybe go to the World Series of Fighting not being the most kind of stable organization. They don't know everything on the even keel, but I would, and also the thing is, no offense to John Fitch and Yushin Okami, to me that's not as big of an event for World Series of Fighting. It's not a title. Yeah, it's two bigger names in the sport, but to me, their last fight was kind of a really big one with Justin Gaethje, even though and you also had David Branch. That you got to maybe on a little more stacked card throw in the 125ers. I don't think this is going to attract any more viewers to the fight, but I do like the fact they are adding the flyweight division and crowning champion. I will say that.
Yeah, I like it because people do give 125ers a lot of crap, but I think because it's so small and so new and like UFC, there's so much talent out there to be found and there's so much room for it. So I think if there's any division that could go really well and have a lot of good talent that could compete, it is the 125ers. So I like it. And I mean, honestly, I love watching 125ers fight too. It's like a whole different world watching them fight. So good on World Series of Fighting.
We got to bring this up. Former UFC middleweight champion Rich Ace Franklin has finally called it a career after more than 3 years away from his last fight. He's finally decided to hang up the gloves. He's already the guy kind of running the show with ONE FC. I believe he did still have a fight on his UFC contract, but kind of just let that go, and he retires with a record of 29-7, won no contest now at 40 years old. The native of Cincinnati, Ohio, and the former high school science teacher, at one point captured the UFC middleweight championship, as I mentioned, as he was able to defeat Evan Tanner back at UFC 53. He defended it twice, defeating Nate Quarry and David Loazo. Eventually lost the title to Anderson Silva, starting Silva's run back at UFC 164. And kind of after that, bounced between light heavyweight and middleweight, but was able to pick up some impressive victories along the way, beating the likes of Yushin Okami, Matt Hamill, Wanderlei Silva, Chuck Liddell, and of course Wanderlei Silva again. Also had some good fights with Forrest Griffin and Kung Lee as well. And this was a guy that up until the Kung Lee fight, they made a stat that, and I believe his first ever UFC fight where he defeated Ken Shamrock on the, I'm sorry, not his first ever UFC fight. He had beat Jorge Rivera, but that was his second UFC fight. That besides the Shamrock fight, that was his only fight not featured on a pay-per-view card. And when he was featured on a pay-per-view card, it was almost either the main event or a main card fight. This is one of the first, longevity guys. a star. People liked him. He had a good style, well-rounded guy. I mean, he had 15 knockouts, 10 submissions to his credit. Unfortunately, he got caught up by Anderson Silva and how great he was, and that kind of overshadows maybe what his run could have been in the middleweight division. But I think this is a guy that, even with the losses to Silva, to me is a UFC Hall of Famer just from what he's done for the sport. The story, like I said, this guy was a high school teacher and all of a sudden becomes one of the best fighters in the world. I think this guy, he's a class act. You never hear a bad thing about Rich Franklin. And this is a guy I think maybe next year at UFC 200, we'll see him inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, if not then at some point.
Yeah, he for sure deserves a Hall of Fame nod. I mean, I think, honestly, kind of like you said, if there wouldn't have been the exception that is Anderson Silva, probably the greatest of all time, I think he would have had like a GSP as run, sort of how if you look at all the guys he beat in between Silva, those are basically guys Silva went on to fight. Like, I think he would have had a lot of those title defenses. He was that good. So, got on Rich Franklin. He had a great career. I'm kind of glad that he didn't decide to come back because, honestly, I thought he was already retired. I'm not going to lie. When I read the headline, I kind of thought it was already official because it had just been so long since he fought Kung Lee. So to come back now at 40, it kind of, I don't want to see him push it or anything, but he had a great career. It's a lot of huge wins over huge names, and he'll definitely go down in the Hall of Fame.
And with his kind of running at 1FC now, and people kind of came out a couple of years ago, I'm sorry, not a couple of years ago, a couple of months ago, about if Dana White wasn't to run the company, who would you pick? And it seemed like an overwhelming amount of people picked Rich Franklin. So he's a guy that maybe even down the road gets into a position like that with the UFC. Now, I don't know if he'll directly be the next guy after Dana White or anything like that, but by running an organization with 1FC, who knows, maybe he feels in Bellator, Scott Coker, who knows, he's stepping in the right direction to possibly, or World Series of Fighting or whatever, setting up kind of the next stage of his career. And I could actually see him taking over a big organization in the United States like that.
I would really like to see that too, also because they give Dana White UFC a lot of crap about like how they pay the fighters, stuff like that. I think if you get someone who really was a fighter, really went through all this to be in charge of one, it could do a lot for it.
Right, and he's also got, I don't think he's part of that class action lawsuit that's happening, but he's a guy, if you look at the NFL, usually takes a respected former player, much like Gene Upshaw is the NFL representative. Mm-hmm. I could see Rich Franklin being like the union representative for like an MMA type union, like something like that as well.
He has all the fighting credentials, really smart dude, seems like a really good dude. I hope he does do big things like that because he deserves it. He's a great fighter, great career.
All right, speaking of great fighters, and he finally got a fight after pleading on social media, trying to go after Brian Caraway, saying that he was going to retire and just be a school teacher and coach wrestling in his home of upstate New York. Aljamain Sterling finally gets a fight, Billy, as he will be taking on Johnny Eduardo at UFC Fight Night Las Vegas on Fight Pass December 10th, headlined by Paige Van Zandt against Joanne Calderwood. This is a big deal, and people may think, who's Johnny Eduardo? Well, Johnny Eduardo just last May knocked out Eddie Wineland, which is tough to do if you look at the guys Eddie Wineland has fought in his career. So Johnny Eduardo is no joke at 27-9 in his career. Despite being one of the older guys in the division, his only loss in the UFC is to Rafael Asunciao, who has a current win over the champion TJ Dillashaw. So far in the UFC, just 2-1. But like I said, he's coming off that huge victory over Eddie Wineland back in May of last year, and he's also defeated Jeff Curran, who, as we know, Jeff Curran, regardless of what division he's in, always brings a great fight. And really, besides kind of a bad stretch between 1998 and 2007, he's only lost one fight since 2008. So this guy, you may have not heard of him, but he is a legit guy and definitely another great test for the young guy in Aljamain Sterling.
Yeah, he's been around. He's got a lot of fights. And I mean, he took the fight. Sterling tried to fight everyone. You're going to have to fight this dude eventually. And I mean, Sterling, good on him for keep putting it out there and on Twitter, letting people know, like, hey, I'm here to fight anyone and everyone. So I'm excited for that fight. I can't wait to see him back in there.
Now, I kind of was mentioned maybe a little like four-way kind of tournament for the next number one contender. Obviously, Cruz has kind of, I wouldn't say jumped the line, but they went ahead and made that fight despite him not, being fighting for a while. So with that, my hopes is that Thomas Almeida, who is just an absolute beast right now after that win he had over Brad Pickett, I would like to see Almeida fight Caraway, possibly for a number one contendership. The X factor would be when Asunciao is healthy. Otherwise, maybe you make Asunciao Almeida, because Asunciao already beat Caraway. So there's no sense of rebooking that. But if Asunciao, I feel like they got to give him a fight just because of how long he's been out now. It's been over a year. And I think taking on Thomas Almeida would be the perfect thing, because Almeida so far has run through everybody the UFC has put in front of him. So, and if Almeida gets by Asunciao, you can't deny that kid a title shot.
Yeah, he's one of the kids I'm most looking forward to. I mean, Almeida has been just destroying people, so I really like that, and I hope it plays out, because, man, that division is so good right now. There's so many fights to look forward to. I just get happy thinking about it.
All right, that's it for headlines for this week. We're going to move on to some recapping of Bellator. This past weekend, Bellator held Bellator 143 from the State Farm Arena in Hidalgo, Texas. First time Bellator has been to Texas in about 3 years. 4-fight main card on Spike TV. It started off in the heavyweight division as, boy, this guy hasn't fought for a couple of years either. In Vinicius Queiroz, as he made his return to Bellator after a couple of years injury, as he took on former karate champion Everton Teixeira. And Queiroz kind of looked like he did in the past when he was in Bellator running those heavyweight divisions. Some decent striking, but also some really good grappling, and obviously taking on a guy that had a very good karate background. Went more towards the grappling towards the end of the first and into the second. Was able to get good position to get an arm triangle choke there at the 4-minute marker into the second round. And Queiroz is a guy that was very exciting, win or lose his previous tenure pre-injury in Bellator. And if he can kind of recapture that, whether at heavyweight or maybe a drop down to light heavyweight, he only came in weighing 230 pounds. So maybe that's a possibility, especially at 6'7". Dude would be a monster at 205 and would be amazing against Liam McGarry. But I think this is a guy still young in the sport. I still think he has a chance, and it was nice to see him back in action at Bellator 143.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like a Liam McGarry. I mean, that's a fight I'd love to see. But yeah, I mean, he's only 32. That's not bad. How much did he take off? How much time?
It was about 2 years.
And then to come back, get a strong submission win. So, yeah, good on him. I look forward to seeing more of it.
I mean, he has beat Mark Collada was a decent heavyweight. He beat him. He has a win over LeVar Johnson. He did lose to Alexander Volkov, but that was a pretty exciting fight from what I remember. It was all the way back at Bellator 80. So obviously that's a fight that could happen. But like I said, he's a guy that, 6 wins by knockout, 2 submission wins, all his wins by finish. He's definitely an exciting guy, and I think it's nice for Bellator to have him back.
Yeah, that's a good pickup. I mean, heavyweight's finishing, and then with submissions and stuff, it gets me excited rather than just seeing knockouts. So I love to see it. I want to see more of it.
The next fight on the main card, I thought this was a great fight here at 145, as you had Emmanuel Sanchez take on Henry Corrales. This was important because both guys were coming off of losses to big names in Bellator in the 145 division, one to Daniel Strauss and one to Pat Curran. And these two, I thought the first round was a little bit of a feeling out period. And then the second and third, they definitely both went at each other. It just seemed, though, that Sanchez was a little more aggressive and a little more willing to kind of push the pace. And Corrales, while landing, seemed to kind of not deal with that pressure as well. And they kind of mentioned that one of the reasons that maybe Sanchez didn't have a great fight against Curran, being he trains at Rufus Sport, obviously Pat Curran trains just outside of Chicago there in Crystal Lake. They said the two have sparred a couple of times, and he said he had trouble separating it being a real fight from a sparring session. And that's something he may not do again if he has that chance again. And of course, Henry Corrales, he had a pretty solid fight there against Daniel Strauss, but a fight you could tell maybe a little starstruck, so to speak, taking on a guy like Daniel Strauss, and he had a much better performance this time around. Was a close fight. I agree with the judges in getting Sanchez, but like I said, this was a big fight because one of these two guys could be one of the next emerging stars in an already stacked featherweight division for Bellator.
Yeah, this is by far, I don't even want to say the best for Bellator. I feel like in every organization right now, these lighter weights are like some of the best weight classes that are in deep. But I mean, it's a good win for him. Close fight, but just a little more active, a little more willing to get it. So I like the win for Sanchez.
And also, to me, this was the best fight of the night. I don't think they do like fight night kind of performance things like the UFC.
Right.
Maybe they do undisclosed, but this was definitely the fight of the night. So hopefully these guys maybe got a little extra check there because it was definitely the best one.
That's a good question I've never even thought of. Does Bellator do anything like that?
No, I think it's something that Coker and Strikeforce started doing a little bit towards the end, but it's not something historically they did, and I don't think Rebney ever did it, for as far as I know. But I think it's something they should maybe start to employ officially. Again, I think Viacom's technically private owned. I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't quote me on that. If they are publicly traded, that's fine. They own Bellator, which technically kind of is private. So they could still give kind of those discretionary bonus we talked about the UFC doing. That could still happen. But I think it would be something nice for these guys. And they could even
100%.
split it up as like because a lot of the undercard guys are typically local guys that they kind of pick up. They're not always guys officially under a Bellator contract. So they could even separate it as like performance award for like the undercard guys and performance award for like the main card under like actual Bellator contract guys too.
That'd be a really good thing. It's good for the fighters, get a little extra money, and then I think it just adds a little more incentive to having them exciting fight. Like you want to bite down the mouth, you can say, all right, maybe I can get a couple for this, to really go out there and get it. So I think that'd definitely be something for them to look into.
The co-main event of the evening was in the middleweight division as Kendall Grove took on Joey Beltran. And this fight had its moments, both good and bad. It was a very interesting fight. Beltran, I thought he looked really good at 185. This is a guy that used to fight at heavyweight in the UFC. And now he's fighting at 185, and I thought he kind of looked like most of himself, kind of stalking his opponent, kind of coming after him. Kendall Grove had a lot of trouble establishing his range. I thought he was actually probably I would have gave him the first. I think he was able to land more before Beltran finally was able to get inside there towards the end. And then the second round, I thought he really picked up that momentum. It seemed like Kendall Grove was having trouble with the forward movement of Joey Beltran. He was able to get inside. He got tagged a couple of times. Kendall Grove did have a nice leg kick going that I think did affect Beltran a little bit. That kind of kept him on his toes. But for the most part, Beltran kind of kept on coming forward. I thought had a lot of momentum heading into the third round, was starting to get the better of Kendall Grove towards that third round. And then for whatever reason, Beltran kind of ducked his hands kind of at the wrong moment after a combination, and we saw Kendall Grove land a straight right and caught him right on the end of the punch, and that just sent Beltran flying, and referee Kerry Hawley had to come in to stop this one in the third round at 227. And it's not a huge comeback, but to me this is a comeback victory because things were starting to not look good for Kendall Grove, and he was able to land that combination and get the finish over a very tough opponent in Joey Beltran. And I just thought this was a very nice comeback victory for Kendall Grove.
Yeah, all props to Kendall Grove. It's a good win. He got the win. I really like Joey Beltran there. I wish he would have done this earlier in his career. I feel like he's been through so many wars, but I always want to tune into a Joey Beltran fight because the dude will fight anyone, any size. He fought heavyweight, and he's going to come forward and put his pace no matter what. So I really like him. I wish he would have went down a little earlier. I don't know where he goes from here because this is a couple TKO losses in a row, right? I mean, before this, he had Emmanuel Newton,
which actually broke his jaw. He had to have his jaw wired shut. They kind of mentioned that during the broadcast.
Oh, he did have a win in between there.
That was his first fight at middleweight, taking out Brian Rogers.
So, and Quentin Jackson. So he had some tough fights there, but maybe he could find a home there and keep moving forward. He's only 33. He's a little younger than I thought, so he can definitely keep pushing it. But I like that weight. I hope he stays there. He put on a good fight. Sometimes you get caught.
Main event of the evening, Joe Warren against LC Davis, bantamweight division. The winner getting a guaranteed shot at the Bellator bantamweight title. And as much as I thought LC Davis would be able to keep the fight standing and use that stand-up that is better than Joe Warren, and obviously I think LC Davis also had a good grappling background, didn't quite work out that way as Joe Warren was pretty much able to do what Joe Warren usually does, keep moving forward, attack with the takedown, be aggressive, and hold down his opponent and really not allow them any room to breathe to try to use superior stand-up skills. And he ends up getting the unanimous decision victory. I thought Davis fought well. There are a couple of chances that he did have. He landed a couple of very nice straight lefts in the fight that definitely I did think hurt Warren. But at the end of the day, if you're not really threatening him with submissions, you're not scrambling, you're not doing anything crazy off your back, you're probably not going to beat this guy. And we kind of saw that in the Marcus Galvo fight. You got to attack this guy with submissions because even though he's great with wrestling, he's not necessarily great at submissions. And we've seen him get caught a couple of times.
I was just about to say, exactly. If you want to beat Joe Warren, you're going to be good off your back because he's going to do the same thing every fight. He's going to be aggressive in your face, put you on your back. So when you're going up against him, that's all you should be working on is throwing constant stuff off your back.
And this is a good learning experience for LC Davis. I think this was his only loss at bantamweight since dropping down from 145. I still think he's a major player in their bantamweight division, but he kind of realizes, like, this is what it's got to take. Joe Warren's one of the top guys, not just in Bellator, in the world. I mean, let's not get this straight. This dude is amazing wrestling. I mean, he hasn't won a medal, but he's won world championships in Greco-Roman, was an All-American at the University of Michigan. This dude is a tough dude, and he's beaten guys in 2 different divisions that are really good. So I like Joe Warren. This fight wasn't the most exciting one he's had. I do look forward to his rematch either against Dantes or Galvo. However, that fight goes in just a couple weeks here. We get to see Galvo and Dantes, so I'm really excited for that. So hopefully sometime next year we'll hear it announced, Joe Warren against the winner of Galvo and Dantes.
Yeah, we'll definitely see that, and I look forward to it. Yeah, but like you said, for LC Davis, he can take a lot from this, and like he fought a good fight. And he hasn't. That's his first loss there. But Joe Warren is legit beast. That needs to be recognized more. Like he's not good for Bellator. He's good for the world. Like Joe Warren's a beast. So good fight on him, and I can't wait to see the rematch or vice versa.
Yeah, both rematches are intriguing because obviously that submission was huge by Galvo with that knee bar and the scream. Does Joe Warren? How does he avenge that?
Very crazy.
And then you had Dantes, who to me had a great fight against Joe Warren. I thought the judges went the other way, gave Joe Warren the title and the win. So either way, it's great. And both, obviously, Galvo and Dantes are such dynamic individuals with finishes everywhere. You add that to the wrestling. It's going to be a great main event or co-main event, however Bellator uses that maybe for their first tentpole event of 2016. That would be my hope.
We can hope.
We can only hope.
They said they got plans for Kimbo, so you got yourself a good co-main to make it a legit card.
Right.
Give something for the hardcore fans and the casuals.
Kimbo Tito?
You know what? I'm not going to lie. They said Fedor won't fight Kimbo. They have plans for Kimbo, and I did not think about it, but that's the fight they're going to make.
It would just be at heavyweight.
They're
not going to have Tito cut, they're not going to have Kimbo cut weight.
Yeah, 100%. And
I mean, why not?
I'm so mad I didn't think of that. It's going to happen. What bigger draw than Tito Kimbo? I mean, damn it, Bellator.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
It's going to now. I'm so mad you just said that because it's going to happen. And I never even
co-main
crossed my
event,
mind.
the bantamweight title.
God damn it. Damn it, Scott Coker. You know what? Because I'm mad, but I can't wait to watch that fight already.
All right.
I'm calling it now. Kimbo by Gogo Plata. Watch out, Tito. Don't put him on his back.
All right, let's get to UFC Fight Night Japan 2015. 6 fights on the main card. Fox Sports 1 Saturday night. What a great night of fights for the UFC here in Japan. Every fight I thought was great. We saw some great knockouts. We saw some great overall fights, great performances. And it all started with the guys you and I, Billy, didn't know a lot about. This UFC Road to Japan thing that they were doing, kind of a mini Ultimate Fighter thing, so to speak, between Mizuta Hirota and Teruto Ishihara. And just what a fight these dudes put on. I know it was kind of supposed to be for a contract. I think they both get one. It was a draw, but
they did, I think, after his
boy, they earned it. To me, they earned the contract. Just both guys going back and forth. When it seemed like Hirota had the upper hand, Ishihara would answer. When Ishihara had the upper hand, it seemed like Hirota answered. They were both moving forward, both landing bombs. There was some grappling exchanges, mostly initiated by Hirota. Ishihara did a good job keeping the fight standing for the most part. The only negative I really saw from either guy, Ishihara kind of kept his hands a little too low during this fight. And not saying Hirota couldn't have knocked him out, but there are good guys in this division, the featherweight division, that you can't do that against. And Ishihara, I think if he's going to evolve and be good in this sport and in the UFC, that's something he's going to have to correct, because there's guys like Conor McGregor, Max Holloway, Cub Swanson.
Yeah.
You just maybe even Jeremy Stevens or Dennis Bermudez. These are guys that are powerful punchers with great stand-up. I mean, Jose Aldo, of course, the champion. But these are guys that you just can't leave your hands down, because these guys are quick, fast, and powerful, and they're going to knock you out if they do.
Yeah, there was one where he kept throwing this like straight left, I think, and like ducking under with his hands down, and I kept seeing like, oh, Rocha's going to read that. He's going to catch him. He's going to catch him. He didn't, and the left kept landing, so I give him credit. But when you go against the names you just named or something, he's going to have to tighten it up a little bit. But either way, this fight was super exciting. I was out of town in a hotel ready to go to sleep. I was like, I'll just watch the fights when I get home. Put this fight on, ended up watching the whole card because it was such a good first fight.
Now, this kind of reminded me, maybe not quite as good, but close kind of to the Hunt Bigfoot fight, where it was such a good fight. It was a draw, but you don't even feel disappointed because it was such a good fight. It's like both guys were very close. I kind of thought Hirota, honestly, was going to get the decision.
Thought he was going to get the nod,
he was moving
too.
forward a little bit more. He was putting up Ishihara up against the cage. I thought the judges were going to give him that. But it's funny because Hirota in the post-fight interview, you could tell very tired. They asked him, and he's like, "Do you think he won?" And then the translator talks, and he's like, no. He didn't even say it in Japanese. He's just like, no. And the whole crowd kind of clapped and stuff. And but that was great that he was kind of even willing to admit, he's like, hey, I fought my best. Maybe I didn't think I won, but he goes, he did his best.
I thought they were going to give him the nod, honestly, but I'm not mad with the draw. I think it was that type of fight. So good on both of them. The only disappointment I thought was the language barrier made it super confusing when the draw was announced. But I mean, it was a great fight. I look forward to seeing both of them again. So maybe they just run it back. Who knows? Because I think they said it should have went to a fourth round.
Yeah, actually, I think it was on. If you go to the UFC Pick'em, I remember seeing that as a fourth round fight, and then I was like, oh yeah, it's that road. So I think it was actually
why that
supposed
didn't
to
happen. No clue, but for sure run it back.
As we know, the last time they were in another country when something like this happened, they needed a fourth round. We all remember the Mighty Mouse and Ian McCall fight. That was supposed to go to a fourth round. Anything that's out of the norm sometimes gets messed up, and I think that was the case. But I mean, for something like this where it was relatively minor, that fight, obviously, win or lose, was probably going to get both guys a contract. So to me, it kind of is.
This definitely wasn't as bad as the McCall Mighty Mouse situation.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad they both got a contract. But honestly, I'd like to see him just run this fight again.
It could happen.
It's very exciting. You get a good draw. Let's see it.
Next fight of the evening, also in the featherweight division, Diego Brandao against Katsunori Kikono. We kind of predicted this, Billy. We said Kikono has had a propensity of getting knocked out in the first round, plays right into Brandao's hand. And what did Brando do? Run over to the other side of the cage, throw bombs like he does, knocks him out quickly, 28 seconds in the first round. And that's what Diego Brandao does. What is he known for? He's known for throwing those quick punches, and if you can't weather that early storm, you're going to get finished just like Kikono did.
Yeah, there's not much to break down this fight. Just like we said beforehand, just like it happened. If Brandao lands that hand on almost anyone, they're going to be in trouble, let alone Kikono's had his problems. So tough fight for him, man. I don't know where he goes from here, but for Brandao, it's good to get back in the right direction with a huge knockout.
Bantamweight division was where the next fight was at, as Take Mizugaki took on George Roop, and we kind of mentioned that Mizugaki should really try to force this thing to the ground. That's probably where he's best, maybe not stand up with a very tall and lanky George Roop, but surprisingly, this fight mainly was on the feet, and Mizugaki was getting the better of Roop.
Yeah.
It just seemed like Roop was, maybe it was because he was hesitant about getting taken down. Maybe he was, fatigued from the weight cut, because him making bantamweight is a lot. The dude's 6'1". You don't see that anywhere, a dude that tall at 135 pounds. Also, add in traveling from America to Japan. It's an 18-hour flight. That does affect people, especially if you've never done it before. I don't know what it was, but it just seemed like Roop was just a step down from Mizugaki, not in terms of level, just in terms of performing that night. I've seen George Roop perform a lot better than that. I think we all have, and it just didn't seem like he was just a second slower to the punch. He also initiated the clinch a lot, which I didn't get. It kind of played right into Mizugaki's hand. Mizugaki, I think, was more to kind of mix it up in the clinch. When it went to the clinch, it really didn't go Roop's way. And like I said, when it was on the feet, Mizugaki looked really good. I thought he showed pretty sharp stand-up. and the reach and height problem was really no problem for the hometown guy there in Japan. And nevertheless, Mizugaki was able to earn himself a unanimous decision victory.
Yeah, I think Root might have prepared a little bit or something, expecting to be on his back more, but Mizugaki went out there and got it done. I think maybe it's credit just to, I don't say the experience, but Mizugaki's been in there with the more elite guys in the world. I mean, name the best, Mizugaki's fought him. So I think he did that, and he had the edge, man. He got it done. Tough fight for Root, but I do look forward to seeing him again. I think he can perform a lot stronger than that. I think he's even capable of beating guys like Mizugaki, but it wasn't his night.
The next fight of the evening in the flyweight division is Koji Horiguchi took on Chico Kamas. And while it was a great performance by Horiguchi, but what a performance by Chico Kamas. I mean, he flies all the way to Japan to take on one of the best in the world in their home country. He just has the one corner guy because the UFC only gives you the one corner guy. I thought he performed well, but it's hard to stand up with Horiguchi and deal with that blitz, the unorthodox style, the creative style, and just not only the speed I'm mentioning, but the power he brings behind it. I mean, I thought Kamas held up admirably. He definitely tagged Horiguchi with some shots. That was a completely one-sided fight. But if you weren't going to go to the ground or threaten with that takedown and mix it up that way, if you were going to try to stand up and bang with Horiguchi, it so far has not been proven that anyone can do that. And it was going to be the hometown guy there. It was going to be his fight, and very nice bounce back win for Horiguchi. And I think he did things a little differently in this fight than he did in the Mighty Mouse fight in terms of his movement, bouncing up and back. And I think he kind of slowed things down a little bit to a degree in terms of he didn't do everything so quickly like we've seen in other fights. And I think he's trying to pace himself a little more. And I thought we saw that in this fight against a tough guy like a Chico Kamas.
Yeah. First off, Kamas is super tough, dude. Man, some shots, but Horiguchi might be one of my favorite people to watch right now. It reminds me of like when Lyoto first came in, like that blitz in and out. He's in, he hits you, and then he's gone. By the time, it's really amazing. I mean, honestly, I really hope he can build up another one to fight Mighty Mouse again. He landed that huge knee on Mighty Mouse, and I think he can land those shots with anyone. So he's so fun to watch, so I can't repeat enough. He's there, but he's not there. He blitzes in, and he's right out. The speed's amazing. I really like this dude. I think he's pretty young, too, isn't he?
I believe he's 25 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I will double-check that real quickly here. Yeah, and he is 24, actually.
24,
so there you go.
Super young. Has all the potential to just take a couple years, keep building it up, and then get another shot at Mighty Mouse.
Co-main events of the evening in the middleweight division as Uriah Hall took on Gegard Mousasi on short notice. And, we talked about Kendall Grove with a comeback victory. This was a true comeback victory here. Uriah Hall against Gegard Mousasi. Mousasi gets early takedown 30 seconds into the fight, gets the fight to the ground, lands some decent ground and pound, had Hall in trouble with a couple different submissions. He had a Kimura lock kind of tried at one point. He took the back at one point, was very close to sinking in a rear naked choke towards the end of the first round. Hall did enough to survive that round. He did throw up a couple submissions of his own. He did a lot more submission attempts than we have seen previously, or if anyone even knew that he could throw up.
He had a nice little Kimura sweep where he took him off, so I was impressed with that.
I think it switched to an armbar as well. So
Yeah,
he did threaten. He wasn't completely dominated, but definitely around for Mousasi. Second round, I think Hall knew that if he didn't do something then, he wasn't going to win the fight. I think he kind of realized, like, all right, I'm pretty good off my back, but this dude's good. I can't let him be on top of me again because I feel like he might submit me. He came close in that first round. And we see Hall go to his bread and butter, the spinning attacks. Throws a spin attack, and the thing I don't get, Billy, is he throws a spin attack, and Mousasi, I'm not really sure what he's looking at from the spin attack, but he lowers his hands. If you look at this clip, he lowers his hands. I guess he thought it was going for the stomach, but it wasn't.
I mean,
he lowers his hands and his head, and that foot comes right to his face.
Hall is so good and explosive. I mean, it's really hard for Mousasi.
I get that, but it's like it's almost kind of like he gave that opening to him a little bit.
Yeah.
But that credits Uriah Hall because we'll get to his post-fight interview in a set. But, just kind of looking and playing it back, it's like Mousasi kind of played right into that kick. He didn't do himself any favors. I'll put it that's what I'm getting at. is that he didn't help his situation there. And Hall lands that spinning back kick once again, follows it up with a huge flying knee to the face of Mousasi. Mousasi goes down, a couple more on the ground by Hall, and referee Greg Kahinas had to stop in at the 25-second marker in the second round to give Hall the victory by TKO. And like I said, a true comeback performance. Hall knew he couldn't have another round like that. He'd probably get finished, went out there and got business done, the biggest win of his career, and this really puts him on a path forward here in the middleweight division.
Yeah, I said that before this fight, that I think this is the fight where Hall, he shows that potential we all expected from in big fights, and then he moves forward to get them big name fights we've all wanted to see with Hall. I mean, this just shows, Mousasi puts him on his back, throws everything. Solid ground and pound, solid submissions attempts. Second round starts, you give Hall 2 seconds on the feet. I don't know if I've ever seen a spin kick land like that was jumping. Everyone I see, they have the foot. I think he's full jumping spin kick, and the accuracy, the heel right to the chin, absolutely perfect. Follows it up with a huge flying knee, knowing that Mousasi was probably going to shoot for a takedown, and he finishes it off. I can't. I'm super excited for Hall. I don't know if there's a dude that's been this exciting, this explosive, and that good. He operates at a next level when he's freely stand up fighting. It's amazing.
Now, a fight I hope he gets next, because I want to talk about this, because this is what's the
Silva.
big deal. Maybe not yet, but I'd like him to take on Derek Brunson. Now, some people may think that's a step down, but Derek Brunson has great wrestling. He had that great knockout victory of Sam Alvey just a couple weeks ago. This is a fight that I think is tough because it's a guy that can push Hall with the takedowns too. You're attacking him with another guy that's base is grappling to see if he can kind of overcome that adversity. And so I'm not saying that's the fight that has to happen. There's a couple other ones I'm thinking about as well, but I'm thinking that would be a good fight. And again, they actually were supposed to fight a couple of months ago. Hall was going to fill in on short notice to take on Brunson in Germany, but obviously he couldn't get the visa. Then Brunson ended up getting hurt, and that's when his fight got booked there with Sam Alvey in Nashville. So it's a fight that actually was already supposed to happen. So to me, it kind of works out good. And Brunson, with beating Alvey, a couple wins in a row for him, he's just outside the top 15, or I believe he's in just outside the top 10, I should say. He's in the top 15. So to me, it also makes sense looking at it that way as well.
All right, hear me out. That would be the better fight stylistically to really get a good test out of Hall before he goes to the elite as far as the grappling and whatnot goes. As a fan, coming off a couple losses, if he could fight Lyoto Machida, I feel like that'd be an absolute amazing fight.
That's not a bad fight. Or I was thinking, despite coming off a loss, I think even though I thought he won the fight, I think Talas Leites also would be a great fight as well. I think Leites showed that he's not just simply a jiu-jitsu guy in that last fight. I thought he beat Michael Bisping. So this is a dude that can do it either way he wants to go.
Or jump the line. We all want to see the Weidman rematch.
Actually, he actually wanted the Costa Falopu rematch before Falopu retired. That was one of the losses he had early on in his career. So that would have been a good fight to see, but obviously won't get that. But yeah, there's one thing. Uriah Hall will bring excitement to any matchup. So whatever he gets booked next, and the fact that I think they said this was already his fourth fight in 2015, there's a good chance he could fight again before the end of the year. I think he's kind of proven that he's ready to go. He wants to fight, kind of like Josh Koscheck or Don Cerrone. He just wants the next fight booked. So I wouldn't even be surprised if we see him booked for one of those cards in December.
I would honestly love to see it, but yeah, I really want to see him just get a big, exciting matchup. This dude, if you put him in any fight, is exciting. So you put him in here with these elite guys, especially strikers, just for the matchup. I can't wait to see more from him.
Main event in the heavyweight division of UFC Fight Night Japan, Josh Barnett against Roy Nelson. Boy, didn't expect this one to go 5, but it did. It was good. Barnett definitely had a little more experience kind of going 5, a little better conditioning than Roy Nelson. Roy Nelson definitely kind of surprised me with those takedowns against the guy who has great submissions as well and some pretty good wrestling of his own. And Josh Barnett really went for the takedown hard. Not just, the first round he was the most successful at it, but he did land a couple of takedowns more in the fight. But the difference obviously was the conditioning and just kind of the overall just technical skill of Josh Barnett. Once this fight kind of went into the third, Roy Nelson didn't really have an answer for the clinch, and when it was at range, he kept on backing up against the cage. He did his best to hold in there, try to land that right hand, but Barnett was just too technical and just too well conditioned for this fight. And Roy Nelson, once again, on the losing end of the fight, as he's now lost 5 out of his last 6 fights.
Man, it's so tough to get into this because I'm such a big Roy Nelson fan, but I love Barnett too, and Barnett did everything right. I think it was a close fight and a great fight, and he landed the better shots, the strong combos, couples hit body kicks and stuff, but there's 2 things I want to point out. One, Roy Nelson threw a head kick that did surprisingly well, which blew me away, so that alone I thought deserved the decision, because if you see Roy Nelson get a head kick up, that is not easy. And then I forget, there's one other moment where he's like jammed against the cage and threw like these little jabs, but it was a great fight. Barnett did what he had to do. And for Roy Nelson, I don't want to say this, but kind of like we were talking about before the show, maybe starts looking at retirement. He's 40 years old, took 5 losses now. I mean, or at least if he fights again, someone out of the top 10, I will give him credit. All his last fights have been top 10 opponents, big names. So we'll see where he goes from here.
I definitely think he'll fight one more time. I think he'll probably want to fight one more time. So that's my guess, and then maybe go. But he's a guy, I think, because of his experience, he's going to stick around in some capacity. I mean, who wouldn't want Roy Nelson coaching them, to be quite honest? I mean, maybe the Ultimate Fighter didn't show how good of a coach he was. I think he was just kind of playing the game of the Ultimate Fighter. But to get that guy legitimately preparing you for a camp, I think that's a great guy to learn from. His experience in the game, fighting with all these different organizations, the UFC, the top guys, and really being able to do it with not a typical fighter's physique.
Maybe he could take like
he's definitely a guy, I would want in my corner, or at least to pick some things up from.
I'd hire him in my corner as like a nutritionist, like Mike Dolce. If you make a big cut, you call Roy Nelson, he'll get you into shape. He'll just eat all your food.
Oh, man. Yeah, he eats all your food for you, so you have none left. That's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea.
I'd hire him. Roy, I'm trying to get to 205. If you watch this, come help me out.
All right, for Josh Barnett, real quickly, with the title fight or unification fight not looking like it's going to happen till March, my feeling is maybe either Arlovski-Barnett, perhaps, or maybe Barnett against the winner of Stipe and Ben Rothwell coming up. That's kind of my thinking moving forward. And obviously with both guys being such long tenured fighters, it's surprising we've never seen Barnett Arlovski. So or let me double check that. I don't think we have, or either it's a rematch, 10 years in the making or something, but I would be very interested in that fight between those two.
That'd be a good fight. Oh man. What were Barnett's recent fights right before this? I'm trying to think what they were.
No, he has not fought Andre Arlovski. That's never happened.
He beat Mark Hunt.
So since coming back to the UFC, he's fought Frank Mir, Travis Brown, and now Roy Nelson. I mean, this dude's fought the best of the best in the heavyweight division. I mean, Sergey Karatanov, Gilbert Yvel, Pedro Hizzo, Jeff Munson, Big Nog, Mirko Krokop, Mark Hunt, Alexander Emelianenko, Randy Couture. I mean,
Hunt's coming
Hizzo
off a
again,
big loss.
Dan Severin. I mean, name a dude, and Arlovski's not on that list somehow. So to me, it is, and they're both former heavyweight champions. One of the reasons Arlovski was able to be heavyweight champion is because Barnett got stripped of it kind of right before. So to me, this would be a very nice fight. Yeah.
It is. I didn't even realize that they've never met, because I was going to say Mark Hunt, even though he's coming off a bad loss, but they've already met up. So, I mean, it's hard because I just want Arlovski to get a title shot. I just don't want him to keep fighting people. I want him to get a title shot. But you got to fight everyone, and that heavyweight's backed up so long with Fabricio's fight. So that would be the best fight to happen.
Let's transition, and we'll end the show with UFC 192, our preview and picks of the main card here for the fight in Houston, Texas at the Toyota Center this Saturday on pay-per-view. Before we get to that, got a great undercard here shown on Fight Pass as well as Fox Sports 1, as we got some of the young guns like Yair Rodriguez is fighting the card. Alan Joe Boy will be taking on Albert Tumov. Also have Derek Lewis in the heavyweight division. The big guy they've been showing here on like the UFC, featuring him a lot, this Sage Northcutt. He's taking on Francisco Trevino. We also have Sergio Pettis against Chris Carriezal in the flyweight division. That's a really big fight. And also it's headlined, the undercard is, by Joseph Benavidez against Ali Bagotinov. Just a stacked undercard. Oh, and I forgot to mention Rose Namajunas against Angela Hill as well for the strawweight division. So a very stacked undercard here for 192.
That undercard is absolutely amazing. And the one name I want to point out specifically is Jair. He was my pick as like the biggest up-and-comer, but man, that dude is so exciting. I can't wait to watch his fight. That's like, I'd watch him anyway because it is so stacked and all these fights are good, but he's the one that I'm ready to just go and fast forward right to his fight.
The first fight of the evening is in the women's bantamweight division as Juliana Pena will take on Jessica Eye. As we talk to Jessica Eye, I have the link for the interview in the comments. Just go down below, click it. You can hear what she had to say about this fight at UFC 192, but she seemed ready for anything. She didn't seem too worried about the takedowns of Pena, but to me, that's the difference of this fight. If Pena cannot get this thing to the ground, I haven't seen anything from her that says that she can stand up with someone as technical and as fluid with her striking as Jessica Eye. And to me, the first round is very key. So far, from what we've seen from Pena, not just in the UFC, but also going back to the Ultimate Fighter, she gets it to the ground and she tries to use vicious ground and pound and use it early. And to me, what is it if she has to go 10 minutes? What if she has to go 15 minutes? We know Jessica has no problem doing that, and she's done it against some of the best in the world. So if this thing gets out of the first round, how will Pena still react? Will she still have the conditioning to deal with someone the caliber of Jessica? And to me, this first round is a huge deciding factor in this fight, because obviously if it stays in the first round, I think Pena has a good chance to win. But if it goes further, it definitely favors Jessica Eye. And just to bring this up, Jessica's only been finished once in her career. So she is a tough girl, and this is not someone who typically goes out early. And it's going to be a tough fight for Pena.
Just like you're saying, I mean, the conditioning's a huge factor. The stand-up, I don't think, honestly, she's going to be able to deal with the striking, kind of looting a pick or something. But if she can't get her on her back, I think she's going to have a lot of trouble in this fight in a lot of areas, or if she can't finish her and get her out of there early. So for Pena, this fight is so big, though, because this is like her first elite opponent on a huge card. And this shows, all right, if you can beat Jessica Eye, you can fight with all the best in the world. So I'm excited to see what she can do. And hopefully maybe she pulls through or something. But I'm just interested in that fight for this division, because this division really needs a new star to sell her. I mean, not to sell her around the fight, because it's going to sell either way. And with all the history with Pena and that from the Ultimate Fighter, I think it could be a good fight to sell eventually. So I hope she does well.
The next fight of the evening is in the heavyweight division as Ruslan Magomedov takes on Sean Jordan. And looking here at Jordan, 6-3 in the UFC. He's currently riding a 3-fight winning streak. His last fight, he defeated Derek Lewis at Fight Night 68. 14 of his 18 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Magomedov, only one loss in his career, 13-1, 2-0 so far in the UFC. Overall, riding an 8-fight winning streak. His last fight, he was able to defeat Josh Copeland at Fight Night 57. 7 of his 13 wins are by decision. This is a huge fight for Magomedov. He's a guy that's kind of one of the new guys in the division. Take on a guy, Sean Jordan, who's been around, but as I mentioned, kind of on a streak here as of late. He's starting to put things together. He's now with American Top Team down there in Florida and has really looked well since moving down to Florida, training with those guys there. And this is the guy that, despite being a shorter guy in the heavyweight division at only 6 foot, you add in his football background that he had at LSU. He's a very athletic guy. He's strong, he's powerful, and I think he's developing a lot of different facets of his game. I mean, we saw that crazy kick in his last fight against Derek Lewis. This is a guy that's really developing with a lot of skills, and Magomedov, a guy that's probably going to be a little stronger in the grappling game. And that's where I look to see this fight go. I don't know if that's the best strategy. That's just kind of what he works with, and if it gets at range a little bit, you got to credit Sean Jordan. But in the clinch, it's a much closer fight with Magomedov's background.
Yeah, Magomedov, that's probably what you're going to expect. For Sean Jordan, I feel like if he can stay away from that clinch and stay away from the sort of grappling aspect and keep his range, I mean, we've seen how his striking is growing. I really think he can take control of this fight. I also think he's probably fought the tougher opponents. You don't see a lot of heavyweights with that many decision wins, and as Magomedov has. So it's a very interesting matchup. I think it's sort of striper versus grappler, but not like a classic, because it's more of that clinch work and stuff like that. So I'll tell you what, though, either way, I'm really excited to see Sean Jordan come back in there. If you're not familiar with his last fight, go watch that knockout and tell me any other heavyweight how he's built throwing that kick. You know, that's absolutely amazing. So I'm excited for this fight.
And like you said, I think the X factor is the fact that Jordan has that finishing ability. I mean, 14 knockouts. Magomedov does not have that many finishes. The majority of his wins by decision. And that's a big difference to know that Jordan is never out of the fight, whereas Magomedov at least so far in the UFC, has not really shown that ability to kind of finish guys quickly.
And I could be wrong, but I don't think that Lewis kick was that early. I don't think it was in the first. I mean,
I think the finish ended up being in the second round. If I'm not
maybe
mistaken.
it was the second. For some reason, I thought third. But either way, throughout the whole fight, he's going to be able to find a way to finish you. So if you're grappling, you slow down at all, Jordan still might have a chance to finish you. So it's an interesting fight. I look forward to it.
Light heavyweight division is where the next fight is, as former light heavyweight champion Rashad Evans takes on Ryan Bader. This will be Rashad's first fight in over 2 years, or almost 2 years, when he defeated Chael Sonnen at UFC 167. That was November of 2013, so nearly 2 years out of action. 14-3-1 is Evans. 10 of his 19 career victories are by decision as he takes on another fellow former Ultimate Fighter winner in Ryan Bader, who's on a nice streak as of late, winning his last 4 fights, 12-4 overall in the UFC. Defeated Phil Davis earlier this year at Fox 14, and the majority of his wins also by decision, 9 of 19. I'm just looking to see how Rashad responds after being gone for so long, taking on a guy who's as big and strong and powerful as Ryan Bader. Of course, we both know they're tremendous wrestlers. Standing, I would say, even with the layoff, Rashad's probably the more technical stand-up guy, but we all know Ryan Bader has some great power, especially in his right hand. That's been an X factor in many of his fights. And, with Evans being, a little older, a little slower ring rust, that could be something that could catch him and finish him. And that, to me, is the X factor of the fight, is the power of Ryan Bader. Otherwise, wrestling, everything else is pretty similar. To me, it's either going to be a knockout by Bader or a boring decision, maybe a split decision by one way or the other, with both guys maybe trying for takedowns that aren't necessarily there.
Yeah, I think if this fight was 2 years ago, coming right off the Sonnen fight, I would pick Rashad, no questions asked. Now, 2 years off, you're 36. It's more to me questions about how Rashad shows up than what Bader's going to do. I feel like we know what Bader's going to do. We know what he has. If we see the same old Rashad with his striking and his wrestling, I think he'll be able to get by, get a win, maybe even a big finish. Comes out a little slower, a little rusty, timing's off. I don't know, man. It's just more questions for Rashad than anything for me in this fight.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how he comes out, how he performs. And again, he's not taking on a guy that's a slouch for his first fight.
They gave him no slouch coming back.
Co-main event of the evening, welterweight division. Super excited about this fight. Johnny Hendricks against Tyron Woodley. Kind of a rematch of sorts. These two actually met as collegiate wrestlers at Oklahoma State and Missouri, respectively. So kind of which I believe Hendricks ended up winning that wrestling match. So Woodley trying to look for a little payback here in Hendricks' home state of Texas. Looking at Hendricks, the former welterweight champion, 12-3 in the UFC, got a bounce-back victory again in Texas at UFC 185, defeating Matt Brown. And of his 17 career victories, 8 are by knockout. Looking at Woodley, not a great performance, but did get the win against Kelvin Gastelum in his last fight at UFC 183, 5-2 overall in the UFC. Of his 15 career victories, 10 are by finish with 5 knockouts and 5 submissions. Again, the wrestling is going to be even. They're both strong dudes. Hendricks slightly taller, I believe, not by much, but these are both two of the stronger guys in the division. And they both have power. I will say Woodley's probably the better overall striker. The difference to me, and this is something that I think he had a lot of effectiveness in the Robbie Lawler fights, was his leg kicks. And that's something Woodley typically doesn't do. You don't see Woodley throw a lot of kicks. And I think it may stay standing because the two probably are going to respect each other's wrestling. I actually don't think we're going to see a lot of wrestling in this one. I think we're going to see a stand-up fight. And to me, the difference will be, can Hendricks get that leg kick going? And if he does, how will that slow Woodley down in his power, planting with legs? Or will Woodley be able to catch him early? I think we see a pretty good fight here. Maybe a finish, but I think we're actually going to see a good stand-up fight between these two.
Yeah, they're both looking at it kind of the same dude. I mean, they got both basically even wrestling. Like, even when they had that match, I think Woodley lost, but it was like there was a point taken off, so it was like that close of a match. And both heavy hands, so I really don't know what's going to happen. This might be one of those fights where the wrestling nullifies itself out the window, and then because they're both sort of just heavy-handed strikers, they just go to war. And if that's the case, I think Woodley would be a little better striker, technically, I think Hendricks has a little more of that power where it's like if he lands it at all on you, he can put you out. So I really, it's a tough one to pick, man. I really don't know. It's a coin toss almost.
It really is. And to me, the big thing about this fight for Woodley, his last couple fights, he's been able to get backed up against the cage and kind of been able, well, Gastelum had the blueprint that Roy McDonald laid down, chasing down, using good footwork, making those angles and picking them apart. Gastelum did that, but didn't have the output. Now, I don't think Hendricks is that type of fighter, but he may try to employ such a strategy just because he's seen it work so successfully on Tyron Woodley. And to me, that is something, hopefully, even if it's not employed, we got to see Woodley adjust. He cannot, even though he's powerful, you can't be put up your back against the cage. You lose that power. You lose that ability to plant, throw, get that punch in there. And that's when he may, even if his wrestling is just as good, it's harder when you got shorter distance to shoot. It's harder to stop it, and that kind of plays into Hendricks' thing. You add in the lane kicks if that slows him down. See, there's things Woodley, to me, has to adjust. And also, Hendricks has been there before. He's been the champion. Woodley, this is a big fight. Number one contender. If he wins, he's getting a shot at the welterweight title. Will that play with his mind at all as well? So, to me, there are things Woodley, I think, does have to adjust heading into this fight in order to get a victory.
Yeah, I was going to say, when Woodley fights like strong strikers that stay in his face or just good strikers, like if you look at the Roy McDonald fight, for example, he has that tendency to kind of shell up and he just gets in this defensive shell. If Hendricks can do that to you, you're going to be in some trouble because Rory's a little more technical. He's going to pick you apart. But if Hendricks sees that opening, he's going to land a big shot on you. So he definitely can't put his back up against the cage and get in that shell. I don't know how much Hendricks will be with output or just staying in his face. But if he does, Woodley could have some trouble there.
Main event of the evening for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship as Daniel Cormier defends his title for the first time against Alexander Gustafsson. Very interesting fight. You have the great Olympic caliber wrestling of Daniel Cormier against great submissions and great overall technical striking by the Swedish superstar, as I like to call him, Alexander Gustafsson. And also, the big factor of this fight is conditioning. Cormier, did he go 5 rounds against John Jones? But towards the end there, you could definitely tell he was wearing. We've seen Gustafsson go the distance with John Jones. He's gone the distance a couple of times in 5-round fights. Also, he did the same to Thiago Silva. Better conditioning definitely lies with the man from Sweden in Alexander Gustafsson. The longer this thing goes on, the more, to me, it plays into Gustafsson. And for Daniel Cormier, he has power at 205, but if he employs kind of I'll just kind of take what Gustafsson gives me strategy, kind of grinds, doesn't really do anything crazy, kind of like what he did in the Rumble fight. He kind of just kept on going, saw the opportunity for the finish, and then got it. I don't think you can employ that type of strategy against Alexander Gustafsson. I'm not saying he can't give you anything you can use, because obviously he made a mistake in that Rumble fight with that kick with his hands down and got caught. Cormier could capitalize on something like that, but I think Gustafsson learned that if he's going to maybe not do his crazy things against high-level guys like that. And obviously he has great submission game. Oh, boy, it's such a tough fight to call. But I think Cormier almost, I wouldn't say he has to fight perfect, but I feel like he almost has to try to get this thing to the ground, keep it kind of chest to chest, kind of like Brock Lesnar against Frank Mir. I think almost has to paint a perfect fight of him being on top, because I think if it's at range, at distance, I don't see how the 5'10" Daniel Cormier gets inside this guy of Alexander Gustafsson. I mean, his reach and how he uses it is second to none, and it's going to be a tough night if this turns into a kickboxing match for Cormier.
See, I do think that if it turns into a kickboxing match, he's going to have some struggles, but it's really hard for me to not put faith in Cormier when the only trouble he's had with Jones, and even that, I've seen him I think he gave Jones a better fight than people give him credit for. I think Jones did a lot of stalling at the end of that fight, and kind of just held on to get the rounds out. But I mean, the thing is, like, Rumble hit him with one of the hardest punches I ever seen. That knocked his body across the mat, and he comes back, he gets in your face, and he grinds you. I mean, training with Cain Velasquez, he kind of adapted that style where he's just constantly on your face, constantly putting pressure. And I think it is going to give Alex more trouble because he's opened up and made mistakes. He's got submitted. So I think if Cormier can put you on your back, stay in your face, constantly putting that wrestler's grind on you, I think it might not break Gustafsson a little bit, but definitely wear him down more than we've seen. Because I think in his other fights, we've seen people just give him a kickboxing match. We've seen, I mean, even though Rumble won the fight, he just stood with him. Jones, they basically just boxed out that whole fight. I think he took Jones down. But, I mean, I don't think Cormier is going to give him that. I think he's going to get in his face and not let him breathe.
And I almost think that's kind of what he has to do.
Exactly.
He can't sit, like I said, he can't kind of sit back and wait, like kind of what he did with Rumble, and wait for an opportunity to present it himself. Because even like I said, Gustafsson's not typically that type of fighter. He doesn't make too many mistakes. Yeah, he made a mistake against Rumble, but look at his other fights. That doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, and even Cormier, I don't think he has like that game-changing power in his striking to where if he lands these one strikes, like I think he more or less grinds people out and lands big shots. But I don't know many fights where he lands a big counter shot. I could be wrong.
I mean, 6 of his 16 career wins by knockout. I mean, that's not a huge rate. He has finished guys, but yeah, he's definitely more apt to grind them out.
Yeah, and even that, like his knockouts, it's not like that where you're standing and then he lands one big punch. You know, he's got you up against the fence, he lands a bunch. But I don't know. I really like Cormier, and I think he's going to give Gustafsson a lot of trouble if he employs that strategy. But like you said, is also correct. If he gives Gustafsson space, he's going to make it really difficult on himself.
With that said, let's get to some picks. UFC 92 this weekend on pay-per-view from Houston, Texas, Toyota Center. First fight of the evening, women's bantamweight division. Again, we had her on the show. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I don't know if Pena is quite ready for Jessica Eye yet. So give me Jessica Eye in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I want to say, too, this card is one of the toughest to pick in a while. A lot of these fights are super tough. I really like that, though. It makes it for an exciting card. But I like Jessica Eye in this fight. I think she's fought the better fighter. She's been there with the best in the world, and I think her striking is going to be too much.
Heavyweight division, Sean Jordan against Magomedov. I like Magomedov. I think he can win this fight. I think he can grind out Sean Jordan, but I like that ability to end the fight with one punch, the better finishing ability, and also he's taking on the better competition. So give me the former LSU Tiger and Sean Jordan.
Yeah, I think Jordan's had the better fights like against higher competition, and he has that finishing power. Might be, let's say, a better athlete, but I think he takes this fight.
Light heavyweight division, Rashad Evans against Ryan Bader. The layoff is really bothering me with Rashad Evans. I'm just not sure how he's going to come out, and that kind of almost forces me, in my mind, to pick Ryan Bader for this fight. So I'm going to go with Darth to win this one.
I really like Bader in this fight, but I can't go against him, man. I think Rashad's a real professional. I think he's going to do everything the best and right way possible and to come out there and look like old Rashad. And you know what? I think Rashad wins this fight. Pick Rashad.
Johnny Hendricks against Tyron Woodley for the co-main event of the evening in the welterweight division. I'm going to go Tyron Woodley. I think that's a little bit of an upset there, but I think it's his time. I think it's his time to get a shot at the welterweight title, and I think despite being in the home state of Johnny Hendricks, I think Tyron Woodley will be able to pull it out in this one, so I'm going to go with the chosen one in this one.
I'm going to agree with you here. I don't want to because I feel like Hendricks is just a little more MMA solid, but I mean, I do think Tyron Woodley's kind of been hitting like these, I don't want to say highs and lows and stuff, but I think this is his time, and I think now he can push through, get a big title fight or something.
Main event of the evening for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship, Alexander Gustafsson against Daniel Cormier. I no doubt think Cormier can win and defend his title, but I think Gustafsson learned a lot from that last fight, and I think that he realized if he loses, it's going to be a while before he gets another shot at the title. Already kind of somewhat gifted this one coming off a loss to Rumble Johnson. I just think we're going to see the best Alexander Gustafsson we're going to see come fight night in Houston. So I'm going to go with Alexander Gustafsson to win this one.
Oh, man, so hard. I like Daniel Cormier. I think he's going to be able to put that pressure and just grind him out, man. I think he's going to do what he always does. He's going to put your back to the cage, your back to the mat, and he's not going to give Gustafsson a second to even think about his kickboxing. So I like Cormier in this fight.
All right, well, that just about wraps up this week's show. As I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, if you want to check out what Jessica Eye had to say about her fight at UFC 192, just go below there in the comments. You'll have the link to the full interview I did. It's a great interview. It's almost a half hour long. I mean, she said it's so easy to talk to. I can literally just just about ask her anything, and she gives a great answer. So definitely check out that interview there. As you've seen, I've been wearing all show. This is my MMA signature shirt to remind you this weekend, Syracuse, New York State Fairgrounds, October 3rd and 4th. MMA Classic Expo, the first ever one put on by MMA Signatures. Whole host of events, autographs, meet and greet, UFC 1 viewing party, roast of Dan Severn, UFC Hall of Famer. You can meet R. Davey, the original co-founder of the UFC, whole bunch of other UFC stars. You can even eat lunch with some of the stars like Felice Herrig, Ashley Evans-Smith, I think Carlos Barza, Claudia Gadella. It's just going to be a great event over there in New York. So again, if you haven't already got your tickets, call someone that is going, maybe get some autographs from them or something. And obviously, if you miss anything, he'll probably put them up on his website, MMAsignaturesusa.com, for you to purchase anyway, because why wouldn't he? So you'll probably still get a chance just in case you aren't able to show up. So looking forward to that. And we'll probably try to get AJ on afterwards, ask him kind of how the event went and everything. So that's something we'll try to line up as well. So any final thoughts here, Billy?
I just want the world to remember that Roy Nelson threw a head kick.
That he did. No, boy, you forgot hashtag free Nick Diaz.
Oh, yeah. Also, free Nick Diaz.
Right. Okay. I had to remind him. All right. For Billy Brandt, at WBrandt21 on Twitter, I am your host, Jim Graham, at Jim Graham on Twitter. And thank you once again for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.